about an hour and 20 minutes away from President Zelensky addressing a joint session of Congress, and that will be a speech that we'll see here live on Fox. Meantime, there is concern about where this is going. Democrats and Republicans raising issues, but largely supportive of the effort to supply weapons to Ukraine. Let's bring in our panel. Early, Trey Gowdy, former congressman from South Carolina, Leslie Marshall, Democratic strategist, and Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen. Mark, let me start with you. What was said, what wasn't said in the Q&A with President Biden and President Zelensky?
Well, Zelensky has an interesting challenge because Biden is both doing the right thing and not doing the right thing when it comes to Ukraine. I do an annual list of columns in the Washington Post of the 10 best things and 10 worst things that Biden did each year, and Ukraine is at the top of both lists. Because on one hand, Ukraine would not be standing today without what Joe Biden did. After Russia invaded, he rallied the international community, he rallied our NATO allies, and to provide arms, weapons, and training and everything. And Ukraine would not be standing today without that. On the other hand, he's slow-rolled the weapons and aid at every step of the way. Before the invasion, he refused to send Stingers and Javelins that could have been deployed before Russia invaded. Afterwards, he spent months forcing them to fight with Soviet-era weaponry. Then when he finally gave them these HIMARS, these are game-changing artillery, he secretly modified them so that they wouldn't be able to fire long-range rockets. And he's, as you saw in the press conference today, then the reporter asked him, why don't you just provide the ATACMS, these long-range weapons, and be done with it? And Zelensky said, I agree. And Biden, gave some talking points about why he couldn't do that because it would start World War III. He's got this pathological fear of provoking Vladimir Putin, and as a result, he's extending the war. He's extending the death toll. He's making the more Ukrainians die fighting for their country than are necessary. And so he's both doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Leslie, here is that exchange. President Biden's response about long-range missiles going to Ukraine.
The idea that we would give Ukraine material that is fundamentally different than is already going there would have a prospect of breaking up NATO and breaking up the European Union and the rest of the world. They understand it fully, but they're not looking to go to war with Russia. They're not looking for a third world war. And I think they can all be avoided by making sure that Ukraine is able to succeed in the battlefield.
Understood that that's his line where he says he doesn't want a third world war, and I don't think any Republican wants that either, or anybody in NATO or elsewhere. However, the Associated Press says the U.S. to send $1.8 billion to aid Patriot battery to Ukraine. The decision to send the Patriot battery comes despite threats from Russia's foreign ministry that the delivery of the advanced surface-to-air missile system would be considered a provocative step, that the Patriot and any crews accompanying it would be a legitimate target for Moscow's military. So basically, the Patriot battery's going. There's different weapons. Where's the distinction as far as the level of U.S. involvement that triggers Russia to somehow respond?
Well, I think there are a couple of things here. And, Mark, I always read that column that you write for WAPO.
Thank you.
And I appreciate it. But I don't agree with you on the bad. Look, President Biden is not just the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief of our military. He's the Commander-in-Chief of military minds, of our Defense Department, of the Joint Chief of Staff in the military that advise him and know step by step which military items, which weapons could provoke or could not provoke Russia. We are part of an international community. I see the president speaking about that clearly. We're not doing this alone. We have always been clear that we stand with the oppressed and not the oppressor, and that we stand for those fighting for freedom, and that's what we're doing with Ukraine. But I trust the president and I trust our military advisors with what they're doing. So in answer to your question, Brett, I believe this is what he's been advised to roll out at this time. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing Patriot battery now when we weren't before is because even though this war is far from over, Ukraine has done much more than anybody anticipated or predicted, and Russia is much more wounded, if you will, right now as a military presence.
Mm-hmm. Here's Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell talking about the priority to continue this funding for Ukrainian weapons.
Making sure the Defense Department can deal with the major threats coming from Russia and China, providing assistance for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians. That's the #1 priority for the United States right now, according to most Republicans.
Trey, do you believe that? Most Republicans believe that's the #1 priority?
I do. I think there's a small group of Republicans and others in the conservative movement, if that's the right phraseology, that Brett's having a really hard time deciding between a pro-West democracy in Ukraine and a Russian thug who kidnaps Americans and wants to start a world war. They're just ambivalent as to which side to pick. So, I think Zelensky is here to say thank you to the American people. I think he's here to say, look, you don't have to wait until we're about to lose to give us what we need. And oh, by the way, if you want to contrast with Vladimir Putin, here I am.
I want to talk about the border, too, but I want to wrap up on this issue. Mark, what do you think that President Zelensky is going to say to Congress tonight? What does he need to say? What's the message and tone as a former speechwriter that he has to hit?
I think he's going to say, thank you, America, for saving Ukraine. We need more help. That's the message he's going to do. And I think he's going to speak to, he's going to be delivering an address that I hope some of that minority of Republicans that Trey was just referring to listen to. Because what we're doing in Ukraine is we're following the Reagan doctrine. After the Vietnam War, Ronald Reagan faced a situation where Americans didn't want to send troops around the world to fight and die. Fighting the Russians and their proxies. So he started funding freedom fighters around the world in Nicaragua and Angola and in Afghanistan who fought our enemies for us. And that's exactly what we're doing in Ukraine right now. We're funding freedom fighters who are fighting and dying to battle our enemies for us in the cause of freedom. And a lot of these Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene are channeling their inner Ted Kennedy and opposing the modern equivalent of Contra aid. So I think they need to listen very carefully to what Zelensky says. And Kevin McCarthy needs to decide between this small band of isolationist nut jobs and the majority of his caucus who wants to support Ukraine.
Strong letter to follow from Mark. We will talk about immigration and other stories at the bottom of the hour with the panel. Panel, thanks so much.
Our worry is that this will launch a dangerous new era. Public disclosure of President Trump's private tax returns has nothing to do with the stated purpose of reviewing the IRS presidential audit process.
We focused on the policy and not a person, on the office of the presidency, and not on the politics.
This was never about being punitive. It was never about being malicious.
So do you buy that? The House committee getting ready to release former President Trump's tax returns. We're back with our panel. Trey Gowdy, former congressman from South Carolina. Leslie Marshall, Democratic strategist. Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen. Trey, what about this, releasing the tax returns?
I just find the explanations to be laughable. I mean, accessing them is one thing. If you want to make sure, first of all, I don't think that's a rule that you have to audit presidents. I just think it's been done. But even if it is a rule, that doesn't mean you have to release them publicly. He's now a private citizen. And I'll tell you this, Brett, I mean, if the touchstone is a legitimate legislative purpose, it doesn't take much ingenuity to come up with a legitimate legislative purpose for medical records, for counseling records, for psychological records. I'd like to know where this ends.
Yeah, and that's the point Andy McCarthy makes. Leslie, take a listen. What about that, Leslie?
I think Republicans will probably do it next. Sorry to the Republicans on the panel. Look, this is a problem that I have with what my party has done. Who cares? And I don't mean who cares that they put it out there. I mean the information that goes out there, who cares? I mean, I'm sorry, but the MAGA group, they don't care. They still think he's wonderful. And the people, whether the Democrat or Republican, see what they've seen all the time. And Americans see what they see all the time. Rich get richer. They have accountants who hide their money. They say that you make nothing, so you pay nothing in taxes, yet you want millions back in a tax refund, and rich people have a way to do that. The average American man, woman, and child certainly don't. And then in addition to that, you have lies. The guy said, I made all this money. Well, who you lying to? Were you lying then? You lying now? Lying to the American people? Lying to the IRS? So I don't think there's any, earth-shattering information here. I should have gone to Vegas and bet a lot of money on how this would come out. And I just think it's a waste of time. He is a private citizen, and I don't think anybody cares at this point. I honestly don't know. I understand the reasons my party gives, but I don't think it's anything beneficial to their original goal in obtaining these records when originally he was running for president and they wanted his tax returns.
Right. I want to turn topics, Mark. Jonathan Turley writes, probing and pushing everywhere. New Twitter releases confirm the FBI's role in suppressing the Hunter laptop story. Twitter has admitted that it made a mistake in blocking the Hunter laptop story after roughly 2 years. Even media that pushed the false Russian disinformation claims have acknowledged that the laptop is authentic. Yet those same networks and newspapers are now imposing a new de facto blackout on covering the details of the Twitter files on the systemic blacklisting, shadow banning, and censorship carried out in conjunction with the government. And it's that last line, in conjunction with the government, that really has raised eyebrows in the 7th and 8th Twitter file document dump.
Yeah, as usual, Jonathan Turley is right. I mean, look, the FBI says that this is an effort to discredit them. They're just doing a fine job discrediting themselves. What we're seeing is a pattern of collusion between the FBI, intelligence community, and social media platforms to censor conservative speech and to shut down, during the election, to shut down information that could have hurt Joe Biden and helped Donald Trump. And now we learn, on top of everything else, that money was changing hands. $3.4 million in taxpayer dollars was transferred from the FBI to Twitter. Now, they say that was a reimbursement program to compensate Twitter for devoting staff hours to processing requests from the FBI. Well, now that just gives us the scale of the collusion. That's $3.4 million is a lot of staff hours. There are businesses in America that don't have full-time employees making $3.4 million. So this is a massive effort, and we've just put a price tag on it. It was enormous.
Trey, quickly, there are a lot of good men and women in the FBI who do great things, stopping terrorists and other things around the country and law enforcement. But the past couple of years have been tough, especially for the political leadership. How do you look at it?
As an institution this country desperately needs, that has fallen into disrepute almost exclusively because of their own actions. We're not going to make it without a Department of Justice that we have confidence in, and right now we don't, and that's coming from a former federal prosecutor.
Well, we'll follow that. Panel, thanks.